What's up, everybody? I'm Freddie Prinze Jr., and welcome to Wrestling with Freddie, the brand new WWF. We're going to talk about my career that I had, as brief as it was with the WWE, my passion for wrestling as a kid, and the love and respect that I still have for it to this day. My time is limited to WWE, but with wrestling being in the shape it is now and wrestlers sort of becoming free agents and going to other places, I can actually talk a lot about other brands too, because it's all shared now. So you're going to hear a lot of stories. Some of them are going to be kind of crazy. Some will be super funny. Some of them are even kind of sad, but I feel like I have a good perspective on them. I'm not here to bum anybody out. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how I got introduced to wrestling, which was the craziest way possible. Then we're going to discuss the moment I fell in love with wrestling. And then we're going to discuss the ridiculous circumstances of me being in Orlando, Florida at Ric Flair's retirement match, being in the room right next to Snoop Dogg, so you know what that smelled like, and then getting offered a job for the WWE, and for some reason I said yes. So that's what we're going to get into, and now it's time to start the show.
Now stepping up to the mic, the host of Wrestling with Freddie, Freddie Prinze Jr.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I got to take you back in time a little bit. My father was a stand-up comedian named Freddie Prinze, hence the Junior. And he was a big-time stand-up comedian, and he was so big-time they gave him his own show, and it was the number one show in the country for a very short period of time. And he died in 1977, so they couldn't make any more TV shows. But the Puerto Rican part of my heritage, my grandma mainly, has always been obsessed with professional wrestling. My grandma will call it lucha libre. Freddie, come watch the lucha. And so my mom wanted me to understand my father's side of the family and the culture there. And she would send me out to Puerto Rico every Christmas break and every summer break. It was also a good time for her to find herself and got a vacation from her pain in the butt only child. So she sent me out to Puerto Rico. And back then, I don't know if they still do it, but they would put like a little tag around your neck that says, "I'm flying alone." And you would have, a flight attendant help you on the plane and get off. And I landed in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and my papo, William, picked me up. He was a butcher, and he was big and buff like a pro wrestler. And he drove me to Boquerón, Puerto Rico, where my grandmother lived. And my grandmother had posters on her wall of old school matches at the Carlos Colon Arena in San Juan. And we would watch American wrestling and lucha wrestling pretty much every day. That and a weird cartoon called Silverhawks, which got me into anime too. But other than that, it was wrestling. And she, as did many back then, was fully convinced that wrestling was 100% real and that these fights meant something and they were important. And the Puerto Rican fans really believed in their person winning because their person was the good guy. They hated the heels. And those will be some terms you hear me use sometimes, heels and baby faces. Heels are bad guys. All like the hardcore wrestling fans are like, dude, we know, but there's some that aren't. And all the good guys are called baby faces, whether you're men or women. So the baby faces have to win in Puerto Rico, at least back then. I don't know how it is now. And we started watching it on TV, and I asked if we could go to see a match live. I'd never been to one. And she goes, yeah, okay. So we get tickets, and my grandma was like a baller in Puerto Rico, okay? Her son was Freddie Prinze. Puerto Rico really claims him, even though he was only half Puerto Rican, which makes me a quarter Rican. That's what a comic named Paul Mooney called me when I was like 12 years old. He's like, you ain't even Puerto Rican. You're a quarter Rican. But anyway, so she drives up to San Juan. She had this great Cadillac, right? And she gets a treatment, man. And I didn't know anything about my dad at this point. So I just thought my grandma was like the governor of Puerto Rico or something. So she gets to park right up front. And this guy sits outside and he says, "I'll watch the car." I didn't know that meant he was going to sit there the whole time. When we came out, he was in the same spot and the dude watched the car. She had clout. So we go and we get right up close. And we're there really early too, by the way. And they're putting a cage around the ring. And I'm, 8 years old, a third grader. And I asked my grandma, I said, "Oh, it's a steel cage match. You didn't tell me it was a steel cage match." She said, "No, that's to keep the wrestlers safe." I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "To keep them safe from us." I said, "What?" And I didn't really understand until the show started. And the fans, I mean, a lot of you'll remember the story of like Yankees fans or whoever it was. They were like throwing batteries at that pitcher, John Rocker. And I think that's who it was. That's how it was here. Like any food that was brought was thrown all over these guys. And all they're doing is walking to the ring. And it's not even a steel cage. Not one wrestler used the cage as a weapon. Like they're just having regular matches. But I'm watching the crowd almost as much. I'm like excited just talking about this right now, like shaking for real, like adrenaline. I'm watching the crowd as much as I am the matches because it was a little scary for me. And so we go back home and we're watching wrestling. She said, "Did you like it?" "Oh, I loved it. I loved it." And I would wrestle with her. She was the first person to ever hit me with a Ric Flair chop. And she hit hard, man. She's a tough Puerto Rican girl. Grew up in Puerto Rico, moved to New York. Had to be tough out there too. So she was no joke. And I would watch wrestling with her every single week. And then I went back to New Mexico where I was living with my mom. And there was a wrestling match that was coming. The WWF was coming to Albuquerque, New Mexico, in this little place where they had the rodeo called Tingley Coliseum. And when I say it had dust on the floors, I don't mean dust, I mean dirt, because it was actually a rodeo. And they didn't put hardwood floor in there in between the rodeos. It was just dirt. So there's a wrestling ring, bleachers, and a dirt walk up basically with some rolled out, tarp for them to walk down. And it was, New Mexico wasn't the richest state in the country. So we go and our seats are awful. So it's a smaller place and there were a lot of pillars holding it up. And I'm not joking. Our seats are right behind the pillar. And so I can't see anything. And I sneak down towards the railing where all the wrestlers are coming out. And it was like a battle royal, I think is what it was, because there was multiple wrestlers already in the ring. And then all of a sudden, here he comes, and it's the Ultimate Warrior, and he's running down the ring. And right when I see him like come out of the backstage area, this security dude catches me, right? And he knows I'm not supposed to be down there, and he puts his hand on my shoulder. And the Warrior's like running down, and I'm not resisting. I'm a kid. I think I'm 9 now, maybe 10. And but I want to see the Warrior, and the Warrior veers to the right, like close to the rail, and he goes, "It's okay." And he puts his hand on the security guard, and he goes, "He's with me." Now I wasn't, but he was being good to the kid, right? And it's not like this place was sold out. Like he was just having this moment. I remember what he smelled like. It was a mixture of baby oil, sweat, and dirt from the rodeo. And the tassels around his arms, like the things you would put on your bicycle in the 80s if you were like, a little girl on your bike with a basket. I felt them on my face, and because of the baby oil, they like stuck to my cheek and slid off as he like ran to the ring. And I'm looking at this guy, and it was still real to me. And he was a superhero. And the security guard obeyed. He listened to it. He did what he said. And the Ultimate Warrior's in no position of power over this guy at his job. The guy's doing the right thing, but he obeyed him. And so they became these magical characters to me. And I watched the brand. And then here's where all the hardcore fans will hate me. Then when it became the Attitude Era was when I started to tune out a little bit, because I didn't like a lot of the storylines. They just played more goofy to me. That said, I watched all the matches because those were some of the greatest matches that I ever saw in my life, still to this day. They had so much time to work, and you would really commit to the character that was built up so that when they had a match, they didn't have to have a lot of time on the microphone. You could just get to it, or get to it. Get is because I'm from New Mexico and that's close to Texas. Anyway, they became these like sort of special, magical characters to me. And so I kept watching, I kept loving it. My grandma, God rest her soul, it was so real to her. My wife, Sarah Michelle Gellar, made a movie with The Rock years ago called like Southland. It wasn't the best movie, but they made a movie together. And for those of you who know, The Rock went from being the people's champion, he was a babyface champion, to becoming a heel champion, meaning a bad guy, and he became the corporate champion. My grandma hated him. He was her favorite. He was handsome, right? He still is. He was great on the microphone. He could wrestle and bounce around the ring like he weighed $160, but he looked like he was sculpted from stone, like Ares or some other Greek god. And he had the people's eyebrow, which if you don't know about the people's eyebrow, you just need to YouTube that. There's literally like 3-minute montages of it. It's the most powerful eyebrow in the history of sports entertainment. And he can just do the one where I've never been able to do it. And I'm telling you, I like this guy so much that it was something I actually practiced and didn't even succeed once without taking my finger and just pushing it up. The same way you would do your biceps. But she loved this guy. And it was real, man, because he genuinely hated his boss, right? And that's why Vince McMahon was so smart. He gave the working man an opportunity to live out the fantasy of slapping your jerk boss across the face when he speaks out the side of it. And that is so satisfying to see as an audience member. And not to get too like psychological, but that's why we love John McClane from the Die Hard series so much, because he is the most relatable protagonist of all the 80s and 90s protagonists. His body's the most attainable. His hairline's the most attainable. His karate skills are the most attainable because there are none. He's just going to out average Joe you. You know, you can't relate to Rambo that much unless you're super jacked. You can't relate to Commando or the Terminator because you're not super buff. But we can relate to the John McClane character, which is, I think, why fans try to push the smaller guys so much in wrestling, because we can relate to that more. But we'll get into that episode down the road. So The Rock turns on the people. My grandma turns on The Rock. My wife and my grandmother, her name was Maria, they'd met. She loved her. My wife's very, very sweet. As John Leguizamo told me, smart Puerto Ricans marry Jews. So I'm smart. And she's always taking care of me. So my grandma loved her, and they got along great. And then about 3 months after that Christmas that we spent out there, my wife books this movie, and I get a phone call from my grandmother, Mary. I called her Mary. And she's really upset. And she has this heavy Puerto Rican accent. And she says, your wife, Sarah Michelle? Your wife, Sarah Michelle? I said, yeah. What's wrong, Grandma? She goes, she's working with The Rock. And I go, yeah, she's working with The Rock. She goes, he turned his back on the people. He's the corporate champion. Bleep him. But I don't know if I can curse yet. If I can, by episode 3, I'll be cursing like a storm, but I'm trying to keep it together. When dealing with my grandmother, it's very hard not to laugh at her accent, right? Like my dad even had a joke about it because he introduced her to Peter Falk, the great actor Peter Falk, who played Columbo. And I got to, one of my first movies was with him. And I told him the story, and he actually confirmed it and told me it's true. And my grandma wanted to meet Peter Falk, and my dad said, okay, just don't call him Columbo. He friggin' hates that. Please don't do it, Ma. She goes, oh, don't worry. I'm not going to embarrass you. Don't worry. And so he goes, Peter, this is my mother, Maria. And she goes, Columbo, I love you. And after they met, he goes, Ma, I told you, you don't call him Columbo. He hates that. She goes, with his last name and my accent, I can't take that kind of chance. Because it sounds like the F word, which I don't know if I can say yet. So anyway, I'm trying not to laugh, but I know she's upset, but she's upset about pro wrestling. And then it all clicks. And I remember, oh yeah, he turned his back on the people. So my grandma, I don't hear some of the stuff in the middle because she's pretty upset, but the call finishes before I say, I love you. And she hung up before she said, I love you too, by the way. She says, you tell Sarah she takes that movie, she's dead to me too. I'm not joking. And I'm not joking when I say this. They never spoke again. She never. And the movie didn't do that well. And my grandma checked to make sure. And she was happy when the movie died. It didn't even, I don't think it got distribution. I think it was released in independent theaters. And she was happy and pleased that The Rock's movies failed. Meanwhile, today she's rolling in her grave because The Rock's the most successful dude on the planet, is probably going to run for president one day. And that'll get her to come back from the dead. But that's how hardcore, that's how serious the connection was for her. And she passed that passion to me, and then I interpreted it in my own way. Now, in 1988, I'm 12 years old, and, you know, the secret is out on wrestling, right? For the 99% out, but there were a lot of us that were still holding on, even though we knew. And I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at my second school in 1 year. I was going through puberty. I didn't have a dad. My godfather's Bob Wall. You can Google him if you want, or I'll tell you about him on another episode. But needless to say, I was getting in a lot of trouble. So I'm at this private school, Sandia Preparatory Academy. And I was doing really well. I made it on the chess team as a sixth grader, and this was like 6 through 12. And they let me be on their high school chess team. My grades were good. I didn't always get good grades. Kids, if you're listening, work harder than me. And there was this dude named Ray Garcia. And Ray, I'm sorry for saying your name. I love you wherever you are and whatever you're doing, and I wish you the best. But on this day, man, you crossed the wrong wrestling fan. So we're at lunch, and I'm talking to my cousin. He was my best friend. I call him my cousin, Chris Sandoval. And this fool Ray comes up, and he hears us talking wrestling, and he says, "You know it's fake, right?" And it was like someone saying, like, "You know your dad shot himself, right?" Like, that was the kind of visceral, emotional reaction that I couldn't help but have. And then he said, I got a curse on this one. He said, "Ric Flair ain't shit." And I like lost it. I lost it, right? Because all these guys were heroes to me as a kid. So, and I always liked the bad guys because the bad guys always won. Ric Flair always cheated. That's how he won. The Iron Sheik cheated. That's how he won. And I would literally look at my mom and be like, Mama, look, and she hated it, right? I started pulling for the bad guys in movies because of that. I never liked Hulk Hogan. Andre the Giant's my favorite wrestler ever. So this guy spoke against one of the great villains who I think is a hero. And so I punched Ray right in his face. And this isn't the funny part. And he falls on the ground, and I legit grab his right leg, and I stepped over it, spun around, put it over his other leg, like the number 4, and I applied what we all now know as the figure 4 leg lock. Now, I had never done this before, but I had seen it done 1,000 times. So the technique was flawless. I get on the ground and I execute what you need to execute in the figure 4. You put pressure on the leg that's bent over the other leg, like the angle part of the 4, not the straight line of the 4. And I've seen, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat reverse this. So I got to be careful. If it gets reversed, I've seen the pain on Ric Flair's face, and it's no joke. So I press down hard with my right leg, and I just hear and I let go right away. I almost threw up. And nobody said anything because it was loud. And then Ray just starts screaming, dude. And don't worry, I'm not going to tell everybody you were crying, Ray. I said screaming. But he was crying big time. And I knew right away. I was like, oh my God, I just broke this guy's ankle. And I freaked out. I got so scared. I ran and got a teacher who bust themselves, by the way. I'm such an idiot. I should have just ran home. But I went and got a teacher, and he had a legit broken ankle, had to be in a cast for however long you're in a cast, 6 to 8 weeks or 12 weeks, whatever it was. And I felt so bad. So shout out to Ray Garcia. But now you're kind of getting where the crazy comes from, right? Like, my grandma didn't talk to my wife, even on her deathbed. She had time. She was diabetic, and just refused to let that go. Ray trashed the Nature Boy, so he got his ankle broke, which leads us to Orlando, Florida, and it was Ric Flair's retirement match, and he was wrestling against Shawn Michaels. And we went out there early. It was me, Macaulay Culkin, and a lot of the wrestling shows I go to are usually with a Culkin brother. One of them has been thrown out for throwing a beer on the big show, by the way. I'm not going to rat him out, though. But it was me and Macaulay. We were sharing a hotel room, and our hotel room was right next door to the Snoop Dogg's. And they brought like a garbage bag of marijuana into there, by the way. I'm not exaggerating. so we're there, and Saturday was the Hall of Fame speech, and this was when everyone hated John Cena, and they booed him while he was like trying to give this speech about somebody who was going into the Hall of Fame. It was a poor showing on the fans' part, but they were mad. John Cena represented a different kind of WWE than what they were wanting at that time, but he had to because the company was PG. But we'll get into the business of WWE in another episode. Because I actually know a ton about that from Vince, from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So we go to that, we meet a bunch of the wrestlers, and I meet this lady who works there who kind of helped do the invites, and she tries to book celebrities and things like that for WWE events. And we chatted up at like the Hall of Fame party or whatever it was. And then everybody goes home, goes to bed. And the next day is WrestleMania. And we're there and we're watching the final match. And it's the whole, I'm sorry, I love you, super kick to the face, right? And everybody goes crazy. And I think we had a bet on another match. And every wrestling match I've ever bet Macaulay on, I've lost. He always knows who's going to win. He could write wrestling in his sleep. He never has. He should. But he's going to win. And we bet $100 a match. That's what we would do. And I would, end of the night, you're out, $800 to $1,000 anytime that you go with him to a wrestling match anywhere. So I'm talking to this nice lady, and I don't know if she wants me to say her name, so I'm just going to keep it out. And she says, "Wow, you should talk to Stephanie McMahon. You got some really cool ideas about wrestling." Because we had talked about like the old school versus the new school and where the happy medium is. Is there a happy medium? That kind of stuff. And I was kind of done acting. I was like, yeah, okay. I was like, I'm staying in New York. My wife and I had an apartment out there then. And I said, okay, I'll take the train up and I'll sit and I'll meet Stephanie McMahon. That'll be cool. I think it's Wednesday, because they had a Monday Night Raw and they shot SmackDown on Tuesday nights back then. So on Wednesday, I take the train to Stamford, Connecticut, to Titan Tower. And this is the building that had the same gym with the pink and purple neon lights that Vince used to work out in, where he blew out like both his quads or something like that. So it's the same building that I saw as a kid. So I'm already like getting kind of tingly, right? Because I just remember the old days. And I was kind of like, what's the word? Disenfranchised with my business, if that's the right word, but you know what I mean. And I was wanting to retire all the way if at the very least I had a foot and a half out, right? And so I go and I sit with Stephanie and we just start talking wrestling and characters and, characters who maybe seem stale and couldn't get over, and they would challenge you with like, well, how would you get this character over? And really just on the spot kind of thinking, right? So you got to be quick and fast, and my improv skills are good. And we're going to get into that in an episode where we did acting class with professional wrestlers and we did literal like acting techniques and things like that. And there's some really great stories in there, and they shined like the stars they are. It was amazing. But so I'm in there with Steph and we're talking about this stuff, and we start talking about acting workshops and things like that, and techniques and stuff to make people feel things, little cheats you can do here and there. Our meeting's not over. And she says, "You have to talk to my dad." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she goes, you have notes on the brand, but you're not crapping all over it. And you come to the table with ideas, not just, "Oh, that sucks." Well, what would you do? I don't know, but it sucks. Like, I would have 3 or 4 ideas for everything. So she would say, "Hey, what would you do with Kane?" And I'd say, "Oh, this. Oh, how about this? Oh, what about this?" And just try to, build it up. And then all of a sudden you have, 5, 6, 7 ideas. So I'm like, I'm seriously going to meet Vince McMahon right now? Like, this is crazy. So this all happens in a day, you guys. So I shake hands with Steph. I haven't met anyone else. I go into Vince McMahon's office. He has this dude outside on his desk, this cool guy named Jimmy. I think he was like ex-army, he's ex-military for sure. And a serious dude, but a cool cat. And he looked out for me when I was there, when not everyone did. And we'll get into that. But yeah, so I go into Vince's office and I have a very similar conversation that I had with Steph. We're just talking about the characters and the reason 2 people will fight, right? That's the story. And so he hits you with like, wrestler X is John Cena, wrestler Why is Randy Orton, I want him to wrestle at WrestleMania, get me there in a way that we haven't gotten there before. And so we would start talking about stories, things like this, bringing these other guys in as like red herrings, which is like a decoy, right? And I grew up, I told you the part with my dad earlier for two reasons. One, so you understood the Puerto Rican connection, but also not growing up with a father, I'm a sucker for him, okay? I want to please my boss. I want to please people that I looked up to when I was younger, right? It's just something anyone without a father or a mother can relate to this. So I'm sitting in there and he calls me son and he says, "Well, I think we could really use you here, son." And he puts out his hand and I'm like, well, in my head, I'm like, hold up. I haven't even like seen a contract or we haven't spoken money. And this guy's putting out the let's make a deal hand. But because he says son, that's kryptonite. And he did it to me twice, that son of a gun. He got me to come back with the same technique. So that one's on shame on me. So I shake the man's hand. I haven't even spoken to my wife yet. She was in LA. And he goes, "All right, so we'll send your people, whatever they gotta get to you, and we'll start you next week." Next week, okay? It's a Wednesday. So I get on the train. I may have spoken with Stephanie again after, I don't remember. I get back on the train and I go back to my apartment. I call Sarah and I say, "Hey, so I just took a job working for the WWE." And she says, "What? You're going to be a wrestler?" I said, "No, I think I'm going to write and I think I'm going to teach him how to act." She goes, "No, you're not. You're an idiot." I go, "Sarah, I met with Vince McMahon today." She goes, "You didn't meet with Vince McMahon today." I said, "Sarah, I shook his hand. I said yes in the room." She goes, "Why would you do that?" And I told her the son thing and she laughed. She goes, "Oh my God, you're so stupid." She was like, "But I support you. If that's what I told you my wife's the coolest." She goes, "If that's what you want to do." She was like, "Try it out." She said, "Don't get fired." I said, "That's why Steph wants me to take the job, because she thinks I'm not afraid to get fired. So I'll kind of speak my mind more." I think everyone has some fear of job termination, but for whatever reason, the longer I was there, the less I worried about it. But in the beginning, I was still a little nervous. And so Sarah goes, "Okay." She goes, "So you write wrestling now?" She goes, "When are you coming home?" I said, "I don't know. I don't know what they want me to do." So here was the deal. They sent me a contract, and I don't want to throw out like exact numbers because I don't know if their business is public or not. So we'll say it was $250,000 and to write for them per year. And it was a number that they weren't going to budge from. And so I said, "You guys can keep all that money and just give me stock. I'll just take stock in the company and bet on myself," right? Again, because I was just dumb. And so against my manager's advice, that's what I did. And signed the contract. And the deal was for me to travel to every single Monday Night Raw and every single shot on Tuesday, but airing on Thursday, I believe, was the date of SmackDown back then. So we would shoot Raw and SmackDown. I would be at all of those tapings and I would be in the office every single week. And that was the job. I took it and I went in storming. And we'll finish with this story because it's awkward, horrible, and really funny. So I get to work. I wanted to bring like a lunchbox. I didn't have one. I took the train to work. I'd never done that in my life. New Mexico, there's no trains taking you places. So I get there to Titan Tower. They take a photo so I can do my badge. So, I have full access to Titan Tower. I can go to the gym if I want. They have a cafeteria in there where they're serving food. They have like the media department where they were doing like, not magazine stuff, but whatever like the digital stuff was at that point. Then they have like the writer's room, then the writer's floor, I should say creative's floor. Then they have the executive's floor. And then on the very bottom is like the merch floor, right? Where you can get like old DVDs, which I grabbed everything I could and just watched and studied right away. So I get there, I'm super excited, and I meet my superior, Michael P.S. Hayes. And yes, the PS stands for pure sexy. Dude. So Michael, who's seen it all, now has to deal with this Hollywood guy coming into his writer's room. And he's supposed to teach me the wrestling business, right? And I'm supposed to write better scripts. And nobody's been told anything about the other person. So I get in there, I have my meeting with him, and he's awesome, okay? He couldn't have been cooler to me. He had just been in some trouble at the company, is what I was told. So he was kind of humbled a little bit, and maybe that's why he was nice. But Michael and I, by the time I left, were really, really tight. So he kind of breaks it down for me, and he says, here's what you're going to have to do. Here's how many wrestlers you have on the TV roster that are going to be working. And you have to give me stories, 4 weeks of stories for all of them. And most of the time it's not going to go through because there's not going to be enough time in the show, but that's your job no matter what. I said, cool, that's my job. That's my job. While I'm having the meeting with him, they knock on his door and they say, Vince wants to see Freddie in his office. And Michael's like, you need to go. So I get up, I'm like, what the hell is this? And I go into Vince's office, and there's this other dude sitting in there named Brian. And I sit on the other side. And Vince shows me the Monday Night Raw script. And he says, Brian, this is Freddie, Brian. I go, hey, man, nice to meet you. Brian's, hey, nice to meet you. And Brian's looking warily at me, all right? It's like all side eye. He's like, what is going, well, who is this guy? And I'm sitting in there like, what am I doing in here? Who am I? So Vince shows me the script, and he goes, Brian, Freddie's here to help out with all the scripts and the dialogue. I'm going to have to send you back to the drawing board on this one. He hadn't even read it yet, okay? Brian visibly and audibly snaps a number 2 pencil in half upon hearing this. He snapped a lot of pencils. And he goes, okay. And this big sigh just, and he grabs the script, and Vince looks at me and kind of smiles, and I'm literally like, this is a test. Like, he's trying to see, he's going to pit me against these guys and see if I can friggin' take it. This is who this guy is, right? And so I'm like, all right. And I don't mind the challenge. So I walk out, and Brian is not waiting for me, by the way. He's already like halfway down the hall. I catch up to him, and I say, hey, man, that's just a terrible way to have to meet. I'm so sorry. I'm not here to rewrite your stuff, dude. He goes, this is because of you, man. Just straight up, all cards on the table right away. And I was like, oh no, this guy hates me. Now, he did. But by the time I left, Brian and I were really tight too. We're not like friends. We don't send each other Christmas cards or anything like that. But if we ever see each other or randomly are on the same chain on a social media thing, it's always all love. And I always check in on him. And he's a good dude outside of his sports team affiliations. So I'm sitting there like, he literally threw me in the fire day one. So I go back into the writer's room, and Freebird goes, how's your meeting? And he has this huge grin because he knows like this is a routine for Vince. Because I wasn't the first Hollywood writer they had there. They brought writers from like USA TV shows in there all the time. And we're going to get into some of those in future episodes. But now I go, yeah, everything's fine. And he goes, so are you ready to work on some storylines that are going to get cut every week or not? And I literally was like, I sat there, I sat down, I opened my computer, and I just started writing. We're going to get into the process of writing at WWE, the pain of getting your ideas killed, the glory of getting your ideas over. I'm going to talk about some wild pitches that were given to me by wrestlers, some really great pitches that were given to me by wrestlers, some crazy on the road moments. I have one, I've told this story before to friends, but the suitcase at terminal velocity during an ice storm is still one of my favorite stories, and I'll share that in greater length because this isn't someone else's podcast. It's my podcast. That's all for this episode. I want to thank all you guys for listening. And remember, if you want to support what we do, please share, please subscribe. That's all for now, but I'll see you guys in the next episode of Wrestling with Freddie. This has been a production of iHeartRadio's My Cultura Podcast Network. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.